Slie. Slie, tola. Ongike. Inkalishko, Pruksarnukul. I speak a little English, necessary these days, I reckon. Hey there, how you making it? My name is... I can't remember my name. I try. It never comes to me. The name I'm remembered by isn't really my name. My descendants can't seem to remember it either, so I can't. I have many descendants, though, so many. I remember that. I remember that I am one who has been born. I remember that I am a chief and that people remember me, kind of, but they get the name wrong. I walk our lands, places along the coast and thereabouts, places people call by the names Louisiana and Texas now. I remember that somewhere in our lands, people can go to places named after me, even a school with a sign out front that says, Home of the Indians. The Ishak, though, that is the name of my people, those who have been born in our language. The human beings, you might translate it, the Ishak, yes. We are the Ishak. Others call us the Atakapa, even though in the next sentence they often mention that it's not what we call ourselves. I don't understand that. If someone tells you their name, that is their name, I guess. It isn't so simple, though. For one, I don't remember my own name. Not the one people who knew me used to call me. Not the name our Ishak people would call me. Atakapa, that unfortunate name. The one outsiders usually call us comes from our far eastern borders, if you want to say it that way. Borders, in the modern sense, come from the minds of other sorts of people, the invaders. But the people who started calling us Atakapa are definitely Yukiti, as we say in our language, the we sort of people, a bunch of Indians, as my children say it. Some Native Americans, as polite white people say. They were the Tsaksta, as we say in our language, or the Chokta, as they say it themselves. Atakapa means man-eaters in their tongue. We didn't eat people. It meant someone who would enslave another if victorious in combat. I reckon lots of people in this world would have done that. Some brainy Yukiti who teaches at some snowy place called Princeton would eventually point out that part about enslavement. That was the man-eating. The record has been corrected, but who listens when an Indian points out something sensible and well-researched? We were thought of poorly because of that name, Atakapa, so why call us the Ishak, the invaders thought. They liked changing our names if it suited them, though, an aggravating trait. For example, they called Bulbancha New Orleans. Ain't that some horse shit? Bulbancha, such a pretty name. The place where all the tribes would trade, including the Ishak, the place of other languages. They attempted to rename after one of their wealthy hoarders who never even visited. Attempted, I say, because I know some of the Yukiti who live there now are holding fast to the OG name. As if the invaders were even opposed to man-eating, by which I mean enslaving people. They set up colonies for slavery everywhere they went, and do it up to this day. They capture people and enslave them now, and on our lands they do it more than anywhere else in the world. Can't eat, steal for it, enslavement. Want to sell an indigenous plant to someone? Enslavement. They are addicted to it. The society set up by the invaders. Do they actually eat people? Well, they certainly sacrifice them and devour the profits. They let people die who can't afford medical treatment or send their young warriors to pointless wars. I don't want to rant, though. I'm a chief, a strong leader. Well, maybe not so strong now. They always want us to be strong, though. I've seen the movies, so I know. One of my kin was a chief near Teotl, what they call Lake Charles these days. His name was Kachkoshyok. Kachkoshyok. It means an eagle chirping. The Kawilsh around there back in the day couldn't hear it right. They heard it as Kalkashu and used that name for the region, Kalkashu Parish. They didn't get the meaning right either. Eagle screaming, they say about it, as if eagles scream. They chirp. Their actions tell their story, not some loud voice. But I'm just a voice now, so maybe ranting is an action appropriate to the situation. But who even is ranting? Not Katkoshyok, but his cousin, Angha, no name. In any case, I remember our people and our ways. You see, we used to...
From a letter from Martin Gerald, commander of the Atakapa post in Franklin, Louisiana, New France, to Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States of America in Washington, D.C., 1802. The Atakapa pretend that they came out of the sea, that a prophet or man inspired by God had laid out rules of conduct to their first ancestors, which consisted of not doing anything evil. They believed in an author of all things, and that those who do well go above, and those who do evil descend into the place of shadows. They speak of a flood that swallowed all men and animals, covering the land, and only those who lived along the high mountain or highland eluded the disaster. According to their law, a man stops hearing his own name as soon as a child of his is born, and thereafter he is known as the father of whatever the child's name is. If the child dies, then the father takes on the child's name.
The invaders pretend they come in the name of a blessed God, one who wants them placed above us. This God is both merciful and possessed with an insipidly childish jealousy. And their God is also in need of prime land for farming, hunting, and eventually petroleum industry exploration. They told me face to face that their God needed my lands, and the firearms they carried certainly enabled my biblical interpretation. They got my lands in exchange for their little bits of metal I could use to buy things I used to get by working for them, tanning, trading, hunting, harvesting, and the like. That was long ago, and now I am a ghost, but I'm still angry about it. They don't like it when we get angry. We're not allowed to be angry. We're only permitted to be stoic, or to be dying, or to be hidden, or to be getting the hell out of town. I am the father of so many, the father of people who are Yukiti, who descend from this land, but also, now, from people whose ancestry is Yukiti and from Europe, from Africa, and every mix of every sort of people who have come this way. Because we've taken on the names of our children, you can call me Tat Yukitiki Histosh, the father of the mixed Indians, the Creole Indians. Maybe that's why I don't have my original name. In any case, what I remember about my name is...
From the book of Louisiana Place Names of Indian Origin by William A. Reed, 1927. Mermentau. In the last quarter of the 18th century, there was an Attakapas chief by the name of Nementou. On April 26, 1784, he is known to have executed, in favor of Antoine Leblanc, a deed of sale to a tract of land on Bayou Plaquemine Brûlé, and subsequently he is mentioned as the chief of the village on the river of the same name. The history of the name Mermentau now seems clear. Nementou, the name of the Attakapas chief, was given to the river on which his village was established. The modern spelling Mermentau is used by Darby in 1816, and as early as 1805, a reference is made by Ceballos to the river under the name of Armentau or Mermentau. Unfortunately, the meaning of the name Nementou has been lost. Though Gatchet, Dr. Swanton writes to me, records Imantua as the original Attakapas form.
So I'm Nementou, but that doesn't mean anything in our language. And the other versions are equally flat. They rarely listen to our names. They wanted our lands, not the correct version of some chief's name. In any case, none of the names suggested for me work, so I'm just a spirit with names according to my moods, living on through people of various names: Singleton, Menard, Guillory, Papillon, Dequire, Créchan, Darensbourg, Lede, Arsenault, Carrier, and on and on. How did it even get this way? Storms brought them. Storms we Ishak can predict by reading the winds and waters, but this storm we did not predict. It was in the vast waters of the Gulf, on an island offshore of our western lands, that we met them. It was 1528. The details were related to me across a few generations of chiefs. It was 1528 precisely, though. It took me a good while to learn to use their names for years. Even when we recognize the beginnings of their years, we say it our own way. Happy New Year for us is Kiwilshilhuelhetstol. It means happy, big, powerful day of the egg people, of the white people. Kiwilsh, we call them egg people. We are those who have been born, the Ishak, and they are like eggs to us. We're allowed to have a little fun as we're being dispossessed and erased. It is our way. Something about their culture never quite seemed fully formed to us poor, primitive savages. We learned that early on. So in 1528, in egg years, we rescued some of them who were shipwrecked in a storm, also rescuing a slave they had. He was darker than them, and funny, and we loved him, and he lived the rest of his life with us as a free man. In our language, the word for slave changed eventually to Kiwilshke, literally, someone who has a white person. The leader of the rescued was a fellow named Cabeza de Vaca. We called him Shokshotola, which means stuck in the ground without a head, a good for nothing. He wanted us as his personal slaves. He never wanted to do anything to help us. He considered it slavery when we would have him do chores around the village. He couldn't even do the most basic of chores. We regretted rescuing him. We regretted it daily. But we have tended to have an aversion to leaving strangers to die, something we carry until this day when storms arise. Anyway, we rescued him and let him stay with us for a year as our guest, generously. And he...
From the book, The Story of Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, by Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, 1537, translated by Francis M. Lopez Morias. I was obliged to stay with these same Indians off the island for more than a year, and because of the hard labor they assigned me and the bad treatment they gave me, I decided to escape from them and go to the Indians who lived in the woods and on the mainland. For among many other labors, I had to gather the roots they used for food, underwater and among the reeds where they grew on the land, and my fingers were so lacerated from this that if a blade of straw touched them, they bled. And then the reeds tore me all over my body because many reeds were broken, and I had to go into the middle of them with the little clothing that I wore.
I mean, this ungrateful prick was perfectly happy to eat our food, but didn't want to pick it. We all used to help out in our villages, even the chiefs, but he thought himself above all of that. He wanted our meat, but couldn't hunt. For a so-called military leader, he had little knowledge of archery, and his spear fighting was poor at best. When meeting new people, we've tended to give them arrows as a sign of friendship. It gives them something to help themselves to survive, and shows we won't shoot our arrows at them. He had no interest in our arrows, though. He kept complaining about needing weapons we'd never heard of. He also never really integrated himself into our culture. He just wanted to sit around and complain and eat and stare. He wanted to leer at the nipples of the women in the village as if he had never seen a human breast before. He scoffed at the loincloths and hide robes we wore, preferring to further lock in his stench with the dark coats he brought. He thought he should just be served, that we should be grateful to Otsapot, the one who stands above, for his stinky shipwreck presence. His people didn't even bathe. Damn it, they smelled bad, like a bison's asshole. And we were kind to him.
From the book A Field Guide to Getting Lost by Rebecca Solnit, 2005. Cabeza de Vaca became a slave to this tribe, living an unbearable life of hard work, including digging roots out of the water and out of cane brakes. He was pared back to nothing. No language, no clothes, no weapons, no power, but he escaped.
He never learned to speak our language even. Why would any people put such a dumbass in charge of anything? We learned to speak his language, though, Spanish. Even in 1934, some of us were observed using his word for water in Ishikoy, our own language. It's a pretty word, agua. He told us he was a nobleman, an hidalgo, and that his grandfather had been a warrior from a place called Spain. Nobleman apparently means someone who gets more than they need just by being related to someone. They hold power without first gaining the acclaim of the people. They con them. It's a vast con with them, incorporating that whole ownership system of theirs. They con people that they own the land and that others need to serve or pay them just to exist. Our Spaniard told us of his exploits. It's enslaving others, making wars of conquest. He thought this would impress us. What would have impressed us more is if he had been good at literally anything at all. He was also such a bigoted little shit.
From the book, The Story of Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca by Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, 1537, translated by Francis M. Lopez Morias. During the time that I was with them, I saw a devilish thing, and it was that I saw a man married to another man. And these are effeminates and impotent, and they go about covered like women and do the work of women and do not shoot arrows and carry very heavy loads. And among these folk, we saw many of them who were thus effeminate, as I have said, and they are heavier and taller than the other men, and they can bear extremely heavy loads.
He was so obsessed with them, the two spirits, our sacred people, our trans people, our queer people, as I hear people say nowadays, so obsessed. He followed them around with his evil eye and a rather obvious hard-on and a loaderous little pervert. Why hate the two spirits? They're as natural and beautiful a part of the world as the sun rising. During my time walking this world in the flesh, I eventually met the two spirits of the Kawilsh. Some Frenchmen came to my village, bringing along some two spirits who were clothed in black dresses and who had items for a ceremony. They asked if I would participate. I said yes, for I had seldom seen such men amongst them, soft and clean. Their head two-spirit put on vestments lined with gold and lace, and began to chant in what they told me was an ancient language of their people. He approached me with some sacred smoke on a chain, led me to the waters of the river, placed me under 3 times, and then anointed me with oil. It reminded me of one of our pipe ceremonies, and they even gave me a new name, Celestin. They recorded that name correctly in their archives for once, but I don't care to use it. They revered these men and bowed before them. It was so aggravating that they scorned our own people who were like that, pretty queers who also put on pretty clothes to pray. They didn't exactly love their own two-spirit priests, though. They didn't even let them fuck anyone, not officially anyway. They never quite got us, who we were, never. Even as they adopted many parts of our culture. We're still here, though, and we...
From the book, The Attakapas Country, A History of Lafayette Parish, Louisiana, by Harry Lewis Griffin, 1959. The earliest known inhabitants of the part of Louisiana which is the subject of this history were the Attakapas Indians. As their name indicates, they were supposed to eat their prisoners of war. A few of these degenerate descendants
Jesus fucking Christ.
may still be seen in the swamps around Grand Lake near Franklin. These Indians, like most of their kinsmen, were not civilized. Their culture was that of the rough Stone Age. They usually lived in crude huts, huddled together in miserable little villages.
The Kewilsh who moved to this part of the Gulf Coast had primitive ways. We had to show them how to eat, even how to make boats for these waters. We cooked and ate together. And the Kewilsh adopted our foods and then conveniently forgot that we had shown them how to eat crawfish and how to like hot peppers. They got too good at eating some of the stuff and killed off all of the bison we loved, the source of much of our culture in the prairies around here. I dream of the grass things, the chocon, as bison are known in our language. My descendants dream of them. They have to hunt bison under the glare of manufactured lights in large, boxy buildings, housing markets full of things no one really needs. They lived in miserable villages and cities, the Kewilsh, places where a few had almost everything and the great many had barely enough, full of diseases we had never seen. They separated people according to color. They never appreciated that we saw no need to segregate ourselves from other peoples. Eventually, many of us looked like that Kewilshke, that black slave brought here by Cabeza de Vaca, like the black people they brought over in chains for centuries following. They enslaved us as well, and we lived with these beautiful and smart and strong and determined people, the black people. They became part of us, and we of them in this region. The Kewilsh almost forgot about us entirely, and began to think we had done nothing with our time on these lands, as if preserving something for thousands of years was nothing at all. They began destroying the place almost immediately. Within 3 centuries, much of the water was undrinkable that we had used. The lands began to wither away, and poverty appeared and reappeared, as they never learned to share their wealth as we did. Do you ever see such a thing as walking in cities where people are left to sleep out in the cold under their monstrous roadways?
From the book, The Indians of Louisiana by Fred B. Kniffen, 1976. Did you ever walk between the corn rows after a rain and suddenly come upon a perfect arrowhead? Have you seen a little hill with live oaks growing on it and been told that it was an Indian mound? Did you ever see a real Indian walking silently along the street in Houma, Sherrington, Elton, or Gina? Have you ever wondered about the Indians? Where they came from, how they lived, and what became of them?
What became of us? We continued on. In spite of slavery and language loss and misclassification and poverty and disease, we continued walking the road of our culture. Even ignored, we continued. We became Creole, mulatto, mixed, and yet beautiful in ways we could not have thought. We continued on, living.
Timos on whatse kaus. Shopakenish, shopjulish anhal. Shu kulish wewesh. Kakal otse shukit. Istoksh yukiti isha kweket. Antol a. Et utkosh anke a. Timkowash patstok. Texot te paisht. Sukyosh panso. Shaka koi uktsma. Titsishiwat. Yikin poshwanket. Ha yukiti. En kala he washo. Neshkak he washo. We shot yush. Ke hunto. Ikilish koi.
Creole is a 50-year longitudinal study of the life of Jeffery Urban Darensbourg. Creole is being in 7th grade at McKinley Middle Magnet School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as was common in the 1980s as public schools in Baton Rouge pretended to try to desegregate. Your English teacher is counting students by race, having you all stand up by category. You stand up when they call for black kids, and all the kids laugh at you. So you stand up when they call for white kids, and afterwards your teacher, a black woman, pulls you aside and tells you, you're black. Creole is really learning the word Creole in your teens, later than you should have in life, a word your Pointe-Coupee parish family didn't really use all that much. Creole is one of your Pointe-Coupee cousins in Bulbancha telling you that when her grandmother moved from Pointe-Coupee parish to Orleans parish in the 1930s, someone told her she was Creole, even though that wasn't the word she used. Creole is your family referring to themselves in French not as Creole, but as nous autres, us, whatever we are. Creole is no one in your family ever calling themselves nègre, French for black, when speaking French or Creole, only calling themselves black when speaking in English, and then only sometimes. Your birth certificate lists both parents as Negro. People speak English, people speak Spanish to your mother. Your father had auburn afro hair. You got a jumbled mixture of their hair and teeth. You have gone into black barber shops only to be told they didn't cut white hair. And in the white barber shops, it's the racism. It's so hard to find a non-racist barber who will cut your hair. At a white barber shop in Denver, right next to a native goods supply store, your neck was getting shaved when a man came in. It was after an earthquake in Haiti. He showed the barber a video of a curvy black couple in bed. That's what caused the earthquake, he said. They laughed. A straight razor was scraping your neck at the time. What to do? Creole is hiding, being a spy, hearing white people talk when they don't know a colored person is around, and letting them keep saying some stuff, letting some of the most vocally anti-racist liberal white people say things that are loudly racist, and holding on to it for future reference. Creole is often spending more time with white people than most African Americans do, via light skin privilege or various levels of white passing. Creole is being told over and over again that you are black and only black, even if you pass for white, pass for native, even if people speak Arabic to you, speak Choctaw to you, speak Greek to you, speak Hebrew to you, speak Garifuna to you, speak Navajo to you, speak Nahuatl to you. Even if when you visit friends on a reservation in the US or Canada, you always meet at least one person who thinks you are a local Indian. Creole is being in a small grocery in San Francisco, in line to check out. And the Latina cashier speaks to everyone in front of you in perfect English. And when you get to the counter, she speaks to you in Spanish. And your Spanish is pretty bad and suitable only for ordering tacos and being a line cook. And you tell her that, and she rolls her eyes at you and keeps speaking in Spanish. Creole is playing poker at the casino of the Coushatta Nation in Kinder, Louisiana, when those at the table start talking about all the free shit Indians supposedly get. And one of them looks over and asks you, "You're one of them Coushatta, yeah? You get free stuff?" And you tell them, "Sorry man, wrong tribe, but thanks for noticing." Creole is being told you are black and only black when you happen to be enrolled in an indigenous nation. Creole is being told you are black when sometimes black people don't see it and won't recognize it. Creole is waiting outside of a drugstore on the corner of St. Claude and Elysian Fields in Bulbancha, where there are a couple of guys selling mixtapes out front and refusing to buy one, and hearing one of them say, "It's because he doesn't like black people." Creole is yelling at them, my daddy is black, you stupid motherfuckers," as they look at you with bewilderment. Creole is wanting to talk with black people sometimes as a black person, because in many ways you are a black person, but being worried you'd be perceived as a joke or fraud or troll, because that happens. Creole is encountering a ranting, indigent black man storming up Charter Street in the French Quarter, saying over and over again, "I hate white motherfuckers, I hate white motherfuckers," at all passersby. And then when getting to you, as he begins to say it again, he stops and says, "Not you though, you got some black in you like me." And you cheer him on as he continues his mission, too quickly to even let you slip him some change. Creole is being invited to a party or a meeting or a dinner, looking around and finding that there are only white people there and realizing that you might not have been invited if you looked a little different. Creole is the photo of those gathered at this rather white event in which you are still noticeably darker than the other people there, even though you pass. Creole is living in Lafayette, Louisiana at the time of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita and seeing a Creole refugee with his family in a coffee shop and talking to him because he looks like your late father and his hands are also darker than his face, like yours. Creole is being at a festival in Armstrong Park in Bulbancha and stopping a young man walking by because he has to be a cousin, and him telling you he is just visiting from Natchitoches, and him saying, we don't even look alike, and then after some questions, guessing exactly the surname of his mother's family in Natchitoches, and noting that they are also your family in Natchitoches, and laughing about it with him as he takes a selfie with you to send to his mama and them. Creole is the oak tree your Indian grandfather planted as a sapling in New Roads, Louisiana, a couple of days after you were born, and you measuring the age of other oak trees in relation to the size of this tree that is your age. Creole is getting a chance to meet Coretta Scott King in 1981 during the struggle for the continued desegregation of East Baton Rouge Parish schools, and wondering whether she was one of your vast array of relatives given her skin tone and her resemblance to your Aunt Betty. Creole is hiding that you are a person with serious mental illness, or a pregnant teen, or an alcoholic, or flat broke, or under some sort of criminal investigation to save face. Hiding it until there is no help given, hiding it and burying it and fertilizing it with lies until it springs up as an orchard of tangled thorns. Creole is having a certain sense of bourgeois propriety and shame, even though your family might have only been the bourgeoisie of 150 years ago. Creole is knowing that people who think tomatoes don't go in gumbo probably think they're white, and knowing that people who think okra doesn't belong in gumbo definitely think they're white, or at least wish they were. Creole is being mixed by migration, colonization, warfare, enslavement, shady arrangements between indigenous peoples and French fur trappers, through boats and dreams and desperations and deprivations of generations. Creole is being in solidarity with those at the borders of the categories of this world, with those whom others try to put in boxes, with those whose identity is too deep to speak themselves, with those who code switch identities from birth, with those who remain an enigma, no matter how much they explain. Creole is sometimes having to go out of your way to show people the photos of your father with his afro hair, of your indigenous ancestors, of the ceremonial apron your great-grandmother made in 1959, or of your more African-looking first cousins. Because there are people who are just white but pretend to be a mixed person like you are. Creole is these pretenders sometimes latching onto you, abusing you, taking from you, hating you, bad-mouthing you, and all the time wishing they could be you. Creole is being on the colored side of the segregation line back in the day and having sandy hair and blue eyes like your maternal grandmother. Creole is your sandy-haired, blue-eyed grandmother having a fraternal twin sister who could pass as a resident of any Indian reservation. Creole is your Union bricklayer grandfather being on a job in North Louisiana in the 1950s and not being able to find a colored grocery to sell beer to himself and his colleagues, and him having these darker colleagues lie down in the back of the truck under a tarp while he, a rather dark man, confidently walks into a store and walks out with a case of cold ones. Creole is that same grandfather whose draft card listed him as a mulatto, fighting as a member of the colored troops of the U.S. Army across France and Germany in World War II, and speaking French along the way, picking up German from POWs he guarded, and returning home to have the exact same voting rights he would have had in Nazi Germany. Creole is your mother not being able to attend the officially desegregated Catholic High of Pointe-Coupee in New Roads, Louisiana, because it was known that any colored people who attended had their parents blacklisted from work. Creole is people in the shitty little rundown town of New Roads, Louisiana, knowing your family is Creole during segregation and treating them like dogs, and then people treating you like you're white in the current day when you visit. Creole is cousins and cousins and cousins. Creole is knowing that even if you are the outcast, black sheep, ne'er-do-well, eccentric, queer, punk rock, weirdo member of the family, there is at least one other cousin across the vast array of consanguinity that you can relate to. Creole is your beady Indian eyes, your bad hair, your tan people think you have. Creole is relating to white people because you are more than a little bit white yourself. Creole is having a French disdain for things as your most European trait, especially a French disdain for bad food masquerading as Louisiana food, for mediocre versions of Louisiana food from revered celebrity chefs, as well as a disdain for mispronunciations of French names, and especially for anyone who says Du Bois or LaCroix or anything else like that, because you grew up speaking French with your grandparents. Creole is your preternatural ability to digress when telling any story because of the never-ending weave of intertwined elements in your own story. Creole is the food on your grandparents' farm. Blood boudin, eggs and brains, oyster pies, crackling, pecan fudge, hoghead cheese, beef tongue stew, organ meat stew, gumbo with chicken feet, leftover cornbread fried in bacon grease, deep-fried pork chops. Creole is your diabetes, hypertension, depression, heart disease, irritable bowel syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder. Creole is being born knock-kneed and wearing leg braces for years and having people talk about it later sometimes, and having not a single existing photo of it due to the shame your family felt. Creole is helping others in any disaster, feeding strangers, talking with anyone, and the way your grandparents would say, stop by anytime, really meaning it. Creole is the 1970s when Baton Rouge schools were just starting to desegregate a bit, hesitantly, and they were always aware of who was who, and your teacher at La Belle Aire Elementary School assigning the bad kids to stand at the fence poles at recess, one per pole, and looking over to see that all of you standing at the fence poles were not white, and that fact being your first inkling of something. Creole is a white kid who would punch you every day when you got off the bus at your school in 5th grade, and then you hitting him back, giving him a bleeding black eye, and getting a talk about how colored kids need to learn how to behave from people at school, from people at home. Creole is being part of a large protest against Confederate monuments in Bulbancha, and an organizer stating, white people might want to be at the periphery of the march so that police will be less likely to attack, and you not knowing if you should stand at the edge because of how you look, or in the middle because of who you are. Creole is being at a Founders Day celebration in St. Martinville, Louisiana, with the chief of your tribe, and being in your ribbon shirt with chief in his full powwow regalia, and being invited there because the Attakapat Ishak, the tribe you're enrolled in, were the indigenous of that place, and meeting a Cajun woman in traditional garb, bonnet and all, who meets chief, and then turns to you and says, aren't you a little light-skinned for an Indian? And you responding to her with, your son is too dark to be white. And he is too dark to be white. And the Cajun woman gets angry. Creole is being asked what Creole is over and over again, and over and over again. The research continues.
Sok Russo, Joanna, sok Misha. Aktíve. Katkas kajket, és a tes, akjan, jökit hémán, jál pejulat, sok-sok, van sokit, cikit tat, nautó wawostit, iti wasra.
In 2010, I found myself at a snooty faculty party in Boulder, Colorado. The person I was with at the time was an English professor, a big brain, and we were there at this other faculty member's house. One of those places with wood floors and white walls, and there was a cocktail brunch featuring the sort of fancy foods that certain sorts of people eat. There was the smoked salmon, and the berry tarts, and the kale, and the clogs, and the and the leaning of heads, and shop talk, and the comparison of trail running regimens, because one must always be fit in Boulder, Colorado, and the recounting of summer research trips to England, and the me eating too much quiche and kind of keeping to myself. In any case, at the time, I was a census worker, driving all over the Front Range in Boulder and Jefferson counties, taking names. I wasn't writing at all. I wasn't reading as much as usual either. I was driving my Volkswagen and talking to people and filling out forms. I wasn't the only PhD in my unit, but I was the only PhD at the party who wasn't doing any PhD shit. As is usual at such gatherings, as an act of bourgeois solidarity and to ensure that everyone was doing their required service to the upper middle class, they began discussing National Public Radio stories from the previous week. And they began discussing James Arthur Ray. This is James Arthur Ray I'm talking about, not James Earl Ray, the latter being the person convicted of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr. James Arthur Ray is an Oprah show guru who was convicted of negligent homicide relating to a sweat lodge ceremony he had led as part of a $10,000 per person weekend. He had been charged with various crimes related to the event around the time of the brunch. Ray, a white man, had led a so-called spiritual warrior retreat in Arizona. It was during this retreat that the sweat lodge ceremony in question occurred. I have been in sweat lodges, and more times than I can count. In such ceremonies, there are heated rocks placed in a pit and a little wooden structure that is wrapped in blankets, and water and ceremonial plants are placed on it. And it is hot, and there is singing and such. It is native. My tribe, the Attakapat Ishak, practiced it in the distant past. In any case, a word for it is recorded in our dictionary, Achang. James Arthur Ray decided that as an Oprah show guru, he could run a sweat. And so white folks paid him $10,000, mind you. And they went into the sweat lodge, and it wasn't with the sanction or aid of any indigenous nation. And it was wrapped in blankets, but also wrapped in plastic tarps. The tarps kept the structure from breathing, so to speak. People began to stumble around in James Arthur Ray's sweat lodge. They had trouble breathing. They began to vomit. 3 of them died, and many others were injured. Ray was rather unrepentant, blaming his victims for their lack of preparation and character. He eventually did some time in state prison before relaunching his guru business. The professors at the brunch in Boulder were discussing this in those voices with measured disdain. "It's so horrible," one of them said. "It's such an egregious cultural appropriation," one of them said, which was followed by a chorus of One of them turned to me like she was Bronwyn Honkatanica Honoria Whitington Thwaite Stewart, some kind of name like that, reporting for National Public Radio, and said, "Jeffrey, you're a person of Native American descent. What do you think?" I was in the spotlight now, my moment to shine at this disgusting swallow, so I told them, well, cultural appropriation of that event was certainly terrible. That's the kind of thing you need to be initiated into, and also the structure wasn't built appropriately, which would seem pretty obvious to any native, I reckon. The thing that was most culturally inappropriate, though, was the $10,000. I mean, first, people who charge for ceremonies are always fake. It's okay to bring a medicine person some money as an offering, or at least bring them some sort of food or coffee. But them charging is a sure sign of fraud, no doubt about it. The real issue for me, though, is the amount. $10,000. In many ways, it is the most inaccurate part of the whole thing. Even in the unlikely, really impossible event that a native were to charge you for participating in a ceremony, that's way too much. It is more inaccurate than the plastic coating on the lodge. The point is, this is important. $10,000 is more than any native person I've ever met or am related to would charge per person to kill some white people in a sweat lodge. I personally would kill any white person in Boulder, Colorado in a sweat in my backyard for much less, maybe only $2,500. I'd even pick some white mountain sage for the occasion, which grows along my fence. I have cousins who would kill any one of you for much less than that. We could take a day trip to some of the more impoverished reservations of state over in New Mexico, and I'm pretty sure I could find someone to do it for $200. No Indian is going to kill you for $10,000. They stared. There would be no when they told this story after yoga next week. They would have to whisper it. They would stare in consternation while telling it, and one of them would stick the bottom of their mouth forward. What the fuck did they want me to say? I mean, what? Really? What? Me, sorry, white man use sacred house, make other white people sick, and gain heap big money. You can't be angry around them. It's a cardinal taboo, like being poor around them, being fat around them, being Indian around them, being fat especially, because it's a sure sign that they need to exert class dominance over you and passive-aggressively mention things such as, no cream for me, it'll make me fat. But I've always been fat and angry. It builds and builds the anger. The people at the brunch party wanted a sort of assurance with a stamp of approval from an Indian eating luxury eggs and brie on land that Arapaho people had lost through acts of genocide. They wanted the assurance that they were living and behaving and thinking correctly and righteously. That they were the moral elite of this land, entitled to its benefits. They wanted me to let them hold my hand through the sad times of being culturally appropriated. Then, later that week, after Pilates class or some shit like that, they could tell their friends about it, and their friends would go, And the smugness could swell. Smugness being the ultimate prize of the colonizer mind. The knowledge that one is doing fine, regardless of how much others might be suffering. The privilege of not thinking about anything ugly or problematic. The distance between the privileged and those at the bottom of a social hierarchy. The illusion that what is essentially cool and good and righteous is solidly manifest inside oneself. I felt it as an erasure of my identity, with my opinions on indigenous matters being reduced to some sort of party spectacle. That night, after making that gruesome scene at the Boulder brunch, I stared at the ceiling for quite a while. Why did I let him out, I wondered. I could have just demurred, I could have said any old thing. I hit myself around it later, left forum, the usual place. That sort of thing has been normal for me off and on for an entire lifetime. Some of my earliest memories are of people yelling at each other, my parents yelling at each other. Things were either yelling or hushed and secretive. Then my stepfather, years later, would yell at me and yell at me. He was a former NFL player, a giant, muscular moron of a man. I have probably been yelled at more than anyone you know. At least I always imagined that I have been. When I was young, I did never encounter anyone who seemed like they were being yelled at the way I was being yelled at. It was marathon yelling, the Tour de France of yelling. I have been yelled at for hours and hours at a time, an unstoppable, vomiting fire hose of yelling. I would be yelled at, and then I would shake at night, unable to sleep. And in the daytime, I didn't even know how to relate to other people. I began having seizures. With psychiatric medication, these have gotten better over time, though I still sometimes have shaky hands when I think about hard times. When I think about old times, I usually just tell people I have arthritis when they notice. A physician ordered tests to see if I had temporal lobe epilepsy in my first year of grad school after a seizure left me with a concussion. Later, I would learn the seizures are a symptom of post-traumatic stress, of a trauma that spread itself across my physical form. I was taken to psychotherapists growing up for my bad behavior in class. I was taken to pediatricians for bedwetting. At no time, not even once, did any medical professor bring up abuse. Never. They never asked me about it. They probably knew, though. They had to have known. Abuse is normalized in Louisiana, where I'm from. Abuse is normalized in the country I'm from, in workplaces, in schools, online, in churches, and everywhere else. I've sometimes sought out jobs ripe for being abused as a school teacher in the service industry. It took a while to notice that. I would be abused by both teachers and other students. In middle school, another student choked me until my neck was bruised. The others laughed, and of course I was yelled about it, mercilessly, when I got home. I wet the bed often, and my toys would be randomly thrown away. I was told there was nowhere to go. I was told I couldn't go to my grandparents because they wanted me treated that way because I was a horrible person. They didn't want that, but I was too scared to tell them. I was 8 when I was told that. I was told I was sloppy, fat, dumb, retarded, not worthy of anything, lazy. I was hit in the head had groceries thrown at me, yelled at in front of my friends to humiliate me. And at school, I was hit and choked and had my stuff thrown away and was unsafe anywhere in my known world. Probably only when I would visit with my grandparents, especially my maternal grandfather, the native one, did I feel safe at all. There was one teacher I had, an art teacher in middle school. He was a decent art teacher, if a little checked out. Somehow he noticed my distress and asked around about me and invited me to a secret club. This club met once per week in his art classroom during an off period. It was a club for students dealing with home issues. We never mentioned abuse, but we were all being abused, all of us. He knew. He told us he had run away from a horrible home life when he was our age. He knew what it was like. We just talked about what we were going through. He was not a therapist, just a decent adult. He took a tremendous personal risk setting up this club, getting permission to take us out of class, letting us talk this way. No one's parents knew about it, and we couldn't even let other students know. Looking back with what I know now, it is clear that some of the students were being sexually abused. This was my only way to talk about it. It was the first time I was ever able to talk to someone else going through what I was going through. I also learned about something I'd later learned to call the moral underground. A term I didn't invent, but one that refers to people who help others secretly due to the presence of grossly immoral systems of power that attempt to govern our lives. This teacher could have gotten in trouble if any of the parents knew what he was doing. He was willing to take that risk. As I began to get older, I began yelling back at people. I began yelling at people randomly. Something began to happen. I would say or do things and not know why, sometimes not even remembering what had happened. People would tell me about it later. Around 12 years old, as far as I can tell, as far as therapists and psychiatrists can tell, I split into parts. We all have parts of ourselves. That is essentially human. I have parts like everyone else, but I also have parts in ways that most people do not. When I was young, maybe 13, I saw a television news story about a woman with multiple personality disorder. They interviewed her, and during the interview, they took a break, and her microphone was accidentally on purpose left on, and she muttered to herself, quietly yelling almost, criticizing herself for doing the interview. She did it in an entirely other voice. I marveled at this because I did the same thing, internalizing my external abusers. Decades later, I would be diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, what they now call the disease of having multiple personalities as a reaction to long-term trauma. That is the only cause of this terrifying disorder. As is common, most of my personalities are defense mechanisms. They are reactions to people harming me. They take over sometimes when I feel threatened. They have names even. Him is the name of one of them. Him is the one with the caustic tongue, the blistering words. Him answered that woman at the cocktail brunch. Him makes words into weapons, and him is quite good at that. Him is usually aggressive in response to threats, being subsumed into the smugness of a bolder cocktail party. A sort of personal erasure with such a threat. Him seeks to protect, even though him's methods often cause me harm. I'm quite different across my personalities in terms of intelligence, mood, energy, and how I relate to my varying ethnicities, and even in sexual orientation. I tell people I'm queer because sometimes I am. I'm not at all ashamed of it, it's just inconsistent like everything else with me. I've never liked this situation, the unpredictability. I quit drinking a few years ago because even though I didn't drink frequently, when I did, I never knew who I'd be, which of my personalities. Some people have never seen the worst of them. Perhaps I feel relatively safe around them. They see Jeffery U, the sweet, somewhat brainy person who writes children's songs and is a reasonably good friend and has problems and is somewhat of a core personality. Most of my friends have met someone I call Doom at one time or other. Doom wants to get rid of the entire project. Doom wants to get rid of me as a whole. Since I was around 5, I've struggled with wanting to kill myself. I'm not sure how this idea first entered my head, but it is always there. If not directly in front of me, then at least in the next room. I have rarely gone a day since without thinking about it at least once. I have planned it out so many times before. A few miles from where I live, there is a sporting goods store. I've driven there, priced a shotgun, held it in my hands, walked to the checkout, and stopped. I call this process the drive. I have made the drive, or at least started it, maybe 20 times. I usually don't go inside. I cry in the parking lot. It is normalized for me by now. I can do it in a rather detached way. No one notices my distress, I reckon. Well, I think someone did notice my distress once. During an iteration of the drive a few years ago, I noticed my phone was out of power and I wanted a phone with me so I could play chess or listen to music while dying. And I went to a dollar store for a charger. I went to check out, their card reader didn't work, and at that point the cashier, a Creole man in his early 20s, offered to buy it for me. He just offered. He took out some money from his own pocket and he bought it. And I left to drive to the sporting goods store and turned around and drove back home. I've held a pistol against my head, felt the barrel glide across my temple, the steel like a finger raking back the hair, stitching my scalp. I no longer own a firearm or live anywhere with one in the house. In any case, the one I inherited from my grandfather was stolen. Often I just try to kill myself a little bit. I hurt myself as I did the night of the Boulder cocktail brunch. I've been doing it for most of my life, since I was a small child. I've poured boiling water on myself, thrown myself downstairs, beaten myself into a concussion, busted open a lip from punching myself, thrown myself into walls. Once in elementary school, after being yelled at, I stuck the point of a metal compass a half-inch down the length of one of my fingers. Doom is an insider, a personality of mine whom I hate encountering. Probably my favorite insider, on the other hand, is the guncle. A guncle is a stereotypical benevolent gay uncle. Someone who loves their nieces and nephews, and yet someone who has chosen not to have kids and is fine with that. I am somewhat of an only child and someone who resolutely does not want his own children, but some of my friends' children are my godchildren, or like my godchildren, and call me uncle, and we relate well to each other, and we sing songs together and do art and such. The part of me that is a good uncle is one of my favorite parts of me. It is related to the part of me that is a devoted father to my cat babies, and is good with animals generally. Dogs and cats always seem to know I'm a friend. This gentle and humorous side of me is an act of outright rebellion against my darker elements. It is me at my most countercultural in some way, rebelling against an internalized culture of abuse I have lived in. A certain softness is a powerful weapon against evil. Guncle Jeffrey is the part of me attached to a dream of a gentler world. There was no cure for dissociative identity disorder. But in the knowing about it, with training and with medication, there is some ability to control it, at least partially. In therapy, we work on that, or I work on that. It is a safe space. Eventually, I found a therapist who had treated this disorder before. Rare as it is, 30 minutes into talking to me for the first time, she knew, even before I brought up my suspicions that I might have it. They followed a series of tests and interviews and the like. My psychiatrist had been in practice for almost half a century and agreed with the diagnosis, even if it's a new situation for him. In time, I've come to see that even the most problematic of these parts of me do not need to be killed off. They are all me. They are all real parts of me. They are me trying to survive, and they can be managed to some degree. They exist, and as long as I exist, they exist. And I don't know what that statement means, even if I know its fundamental truth. The old ones, the natives of old, not the real natives as people say, because the natives now are as real as our ancestors. Anyway, the old ones thought that people like me had spirits in us, spirits with various sorts of wisdom, even in the spirit of suicide, which has the prophetic value of noticing when things in this world aren't right. I've learned a bit of how to listen to my insiders and to not judge myself and to have compassion on myself. The process is still very much ongoing, though. I'm not even sure what the destination is, but the path is at least a path. I have to work this out somehow, even though in many ways I think that having multiple personalities is one of the least interesting things about me. I'd rather think about other things, but I need to think about this instead, because if I don't, I'll harm or kill myself. In any case, I have all of these kids' songs for the godchildren. And when I'm feeling distraught and dealing with all of this, I like to sing some of them to myself. So I'm doing that now because these songs are a part of me. Really, the songs are much more a part of me than hitting myself is. It's okay to be a shuka shalamafingo. It's okay to be a moga choka banga debo. It's okay to be a shuka shalamafinga. It's okay to be you. Sometimes some folks want you to be someone whom you don't wish to see. When you look in the mirror in the morning, but it's okay to be a shukalo, a shalamakuba or mukalo, or even a kandaliki miki or a pokalo. It's okay to be a shuka shalamafingo. It's okay to be a mukachoka bangadibu. It's okay to be a shuka shalamafingo. It's okay to be you. The spooky ghost of scary town is coming to get Campbell and Naomi and make a creepy sound. The scary ghost from spooky land is coming for Halloween, and it is not a friend. Sometimes it's hard to be a bear, one of the hardest things to be. But I still like little baby bears, sweet little bears like Cletus and Pony. A bear is somebody who likes to be sweet, but sometimes it's hard to be a bear, one of the hardest things to be. Sometimes it's hard to be a bear, one of the hardest things to be. We Shafnosh Pushkin Wangam Kamstit Nashnakem Tloptat Ishak Ishat Han Ulat Sok Teken Ishakat Tutoken Ishakat Kuiteken Ishakat Nung Tixt Manwango Otse Heo Shutjuket Ishakoi Chutskoyo. We remain. Our culture remains unrecognized, hidden in plain sight. It exists in our food and our music. It exists in Zydeco music, most of whose pioneers and current masters descend from our tribe, and it exists in spicy food and the way people in our lands talk to each other, and how they invite strangers over for dinner and like to enjoy life in spite of any hardship. We left so much behind, but we didn't really leave it behind because we're still here. Our people are still here. They don't see us, though. They've never seen us, but we see them.
From the article, The Attakapas Indians, Cannibals of Louisiana by Joseph Butler Jr. in the Journal of Louisiana History, 1970. In the later years, as a result of the civilizing influence of Europeans, the custom of cannibalism was abolished among these Indians. This same civilizing influence, in conjunction with colonization and its corresponding encroachment of Indian territory, caused the downfall and assimilation of the tribe, so that today little evidence of their existence survives except written narratives.
We exist beyond the words of willfully ignorant people who never have asked us what we thought of ourselves, never sat down with us, never listened to us, never did an internet search to see if they could come to an event or meet up for coffee. We exist in spite of almost 5 centuries of colonization, invasion, slander, theft, mischaracterization, erasure, and disease. We exist in real life, even for the Kiwilsh, when it's convenient. When a city council or festival or conference needs some Indian to give a land acknowledgement, especially. Look, land acknowledgements aren't worthless. Definitely not worthless. In fact, they're worth at least $150 a pop to one of my Bulbancha descendants. We exist when researchers from the federal government, from the local university, from a medical study, from a permaculture collective, from a library want to ask about our culture, to see if we can dress Indian for an event, to check off a box in the fulfillment of their diversity matrix for a grant. We can dress Indian, all right. Every one of my beautiful Ishak descendants has a flannel shirt, and most of them have cowboy boots too. We survive, and we have left so much behind, but our lands, and especially our sacred spaces, are threatened. We had shell middens in various places along the coast, gleaming white piles of shells that could be seen from far offshore, millions and millions of ranger clam shells signaling the presence of villages. These seemingly random shell beaches are often overlooked by visitors. In Teotol, what the Kiwilsh call Lake Charles, some of the most desired property in town is on Shell Beach Drive, if only they knew the wisdom of those shell middens. There we broke our pots every year, buried some of our dead, did ceremonies and welcomed guests. What we did there wasn't recognized as important by the invaders. We tended the land so well, we engineered forests, protected the coast from erosion, and seeded useful plants in balance with each other. We did it so well, with such harmony, that the Kiwilsh thought we had done little to anything at all. In the lower part of the Vermilion River, as they call it, where it empties into the vast gulf, we had a large midden, one that took a person a good walk just across. Even now it is covered in our potsherds. 4-mile cut, the Kiwilsh call it now. The cut, that's the name now. It was cut through the middle to make room for their giant noisy boats, so burly men can punch holes like spears into the bottom of the sea, dragging up the sludge they use for their lives, fueling their contributions to culture, so much more superior to our own ways, as they say. They are burning this world as they drive through our sacred space. The bodies of many of my friends were there in that midnight 4-mile cut. My own is elsewhere, on the edge of a road. I am dead. I've walked on, and every dead person is dead somewhere. And I am on Louisiana Highway 82, the one that stretches from White Lake to Abbeville. They should put up a marker. This section of the road is named in honor of Chief something or other. We made sure no one remembers his actual name. It's a goddamn shame what they did to us. To me.
From the editorial, we visit the shell mounds at White Lake, unsigned, in the Abbeville Meridional, March 15, 1930. For some time, we've been, quote, hankering after an opportunity to visit the shell mounds at the north shore of White Lake, the former burying grounds of the Attakapas Indians. We stood where former cannibal chiefs were wont to stand. Very little is left of the one-time significant shell mounds. Most of the shells, including considerable human bones, have been used in the construction of the highway between BU Woods and Palmetto Ranch. We were told that hundreds of skeletons were unearthed here, the greater portion of which are now doing duty as road surfacing material. It's all over now. The former camping site of the, quote, noble red man has been demolished in the interest of progress of a superior people. His bones stood between us and the dollar, and those poor bones had to go. They make good surfacing material, however.
I've never seen a person mistreat the dead who would treat the living in a different way. I had gone to visit some relatives so that we could dance, and the fever and vomiting and blisters began, smallpox. One of us must have gotten too close with some of them, or it was in those blankets they gave us. Soon sores covered my face and mouth and groin and abdomen. They were painful, and after a few days I knew I would die. As a chief, my people buried me in a midden next to other chiefs. At least I would lie where their footsteps would be near. It would not last, though. Other people had goods to transport, equipment to move, waters to pollute. On Highway 82, for decades, people would find our bones and arrowheads and potsherds. A fellow who had a restaurant in Abbeville would pay kids a nickel for anything good they found, and he stored it in buckets with the other detritus of his life in a garage. A couple pieces of my own jawbone were there for a time. Some thieves broke in and liberated these bits, though. And when the lawmen were after them, they graciously dumped the hull of our body parts and artifacts back into the Vermilion River. Not such a bad place for such, if you ask me, in our mud and water where we walked on the shore, swam, hunted, danced, and sang. We had seen this coming, I suppose. We had seen this from when we picked up Cabeza de Vaca. We had seen it all along. The colonizer values were not ours, and we welcomed them. We treated them according to our customs, not theirs. I sometimes wonder if things could have been different. Maybe we should have called their bluff and eaten them. I mean, Indians are more from Louisiana than anyone else is, which means we could figure out how to make anything taste good. They accused us of cannibalism anyway, but instead we tried to help them, and they didn't listen. Our culture is a road to a different path. In our language, unlike in English, we speak of the past as if it is in front of us. That's because we have seen it already. The future behind us we don't yet know. And we move on day to day into that future with an eye on what has come before. That is a way of walking in this world. And others can walk with us. There is an option if they are open to it.
From the article, Indians Led the Way in Storm Survival, by W.T. Block, a guest column in the Beaumont Enterprise, April 22nd, 2000. Long before the white man arrived on the Gulf Coast, Indians had already tested a technique for surviving a hurricane. Attakapaw Indians who lived on the live oak-studded marsh islands in southwestern Louisiana learned that when a hurricane threatened, they needed to tie their children to limbs high in the trees using rattan vines or ropes woven of sea cane. In 1830, a Phillips family settled in Grand Chenier, where they were neighbors with an Indian trapper who spoke some English. When a hurricane approached in 1831, the Indian urged Phillips to tie his family high in the live oak tree where he had tied himself. When the tidal waves and winds receded, the Indian climbed down out of the tree, but the Phillips family, which had not heeded his advice, was swept away. Chief, did that really happen? One of you tried to save them?
Yeah, those are our values.
But this isn't the sort of people, I mean, I've read about your people. They didn't sound like this.
Look, my distant brother in that storm, even though struggling to eke out a living from trapping and pellets as our land slipped away from us, he felt bad for that family. He tried to help them, even though they took from us. Such a waste that they didn't listen. We've tried to warn so many, and they laughed at us. Like all peoples who live on the ocean, we learn to read its signs. Okay, maybe not all peoples. That same ocean is the one that Kuils traveled to us without learning to read its signs the way we do. But we've tried to help them. Tried to help all the people who've come this way. We've had children with them, we've shared stories with them, and yet, to so many, we are ghosts, artifacts in cardboard boxes in their archives. Our people in so many shades remain unrecognized by them.
Text from the plinth of a statue labeled as an Attakapaw Indian, located on the grounds of St. Martin de Tours Roman Catholic Church, St. Martinville, Louisiana, dedicated November 5th, 1961. Roving, savage tribe who settled here prior to the French, partly Christianized and civilized by missionaries. Chief, let's just...
Those colonists we warned about the incoming storm died 2 centuries ago, but they are still here as well in some ways. And we are still in those trees, preparing for the storms that will swallow us all as our waters continue to heat and rise. Thankfully, efforts to erase us and what we know have only been partly successful, as you say. We are here in these trees we have prepared. We are here with the other colonized indigenous peoples of this world, holding on with our tremendous capacity for life in spite of hardship. And we are inviting the rest of the world up into these trees with us. Will they finally look on us, a bunch of barely civilized, roving savages for once, and realize that we have lived here in these lands and on these waters for many centuries and might know something about it, might know something about life in general? I mean, it's possible. I'll be walking here checking in. I'll be watching. Thanks for coming, everybody. We can visit a bit. I'll see you all in just a second, please. Let's hang out some. All right.